हरदीप के बाद में डॉक्टर साहब का होगा, ठीक है?
ठीक है।
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, General Puri.
Good afternoon, Mr. Deepan. Good afternoon.
So let us start. So may I request Professor Hardeep?
Sir.
Yeah. Please discuss. I think we have one case presentation from Bareilly.
Yes.
Which
SRMS.
medical college?
SRMS Medical.
SRMS Medical College. And who's the doctor?
Dr.
Rohit Sharma.
Or from the team, Dr. Rohit Sharma is the head of department who will present from the team.
Okay, fine. So Rohit Sharma and the team would present one case also, and we will discuss that one. So to begin with, Dr. Hardeep Malhotra will present the case and we will discuss that one.
So I hope my screen is visible, sir.
Yes, it is visible.
So I'm starting with the case. So this is a case who was a 51-year-old gentleman who had comorbidities in the form of type 2 diabetes mellitus and hypertension for the past 10 years. So I would straight away go to the timeline of events that what had occurred prior to the admission in this case. So on the 15th of April, around 1.5 months from now, the patient had fever and cough, and 2 days later, he underwent a HRCT of the thorax where the CT severity score was listed as 12 out of 25. So this was the initial presentation, and the patient had a local consultation and he was advised home isolation and steroids. So the steroids, it was kind of an unspecified dose. He was taking 4 tablets of dexamethasone. It was not clear what is the dose, like whether the tablets were of 1 milligram, 2, 3 or 4 milligrams. But overall, he had taken this for approximately 16 days. By the time he had presented to this institution, we expect that he was taking around 8 milligrams of dexamethasone, sir. This was the CT that was done and which was suggestive of ground glass opacities, which were predominantly peripheral in nature, and also the posterior inferior part of involving the posterior inferior part of the lungs. So at the time of admission, he was admitted on 5th. That is, he started having, if you recollect, he started having symptoms. Then for around 18 days, he was there and was admitted on the 5th of April, 5th of May. That is around 1 month back from now. So he had complaints of swelling around the right eye, pain involving the bridge of nose, and headache for 3 days. So these were the symptoms which were there. And he was admitted and was tested positive for COVID RT-PCR. So this is the first point which I wish to highlight, that if the patient has not been tested earlier, there is a very high likelihood he might be tested positive later on. He might not turn negative, and we know that steroids have been associated with a prolongation, both in terms of either the persistence of the dead virus or the live virus. She was tested positive on 7th. So as we can see that the involvement of the eye was fairly subtle. There was no proptosis, chemosis, lid edema, and extraocular movements were normal. That was confirmed on the neuroophthalmic examination also. The chest X-ray which was done at that time was suggestive of some involvement which was more on the left side. Besides that, there was some marking which were more evident towards the lower zone, but a significant amount of pneumonia or suggestion of any other secondary infection was not there. He underwent an MRI of the brain on the 6th of May, that is 1 day after admission. And what I want you to appreciate is that as compared to the opposite side, the maxillary sinus on the right side is showing a hyperintensity, that is involvement of the mucosa. There is some involvement of the ethmoidal air cells. These are the anterior ethmoidal air cells. We can see that the inferior turbinate is showing hyperintensity, but frank involvement of the eye or the intraorbital contents are not there. This was confirmed on the axial T2 weighted scan, where we can appreciate that there is involvement of the ethmoidal air cells on the right side, but there is no involvement of the orbit. Very importantly, as I would be highlighting in the next few slides, that the brain is perfectly fine, both in terms of the gyrus rectus, that is the basifrontal part, or the temporal part. So this was 6th of May. So on the 9th of May, the patient complains of an increasing severity of the headache. That we'll see in the next slides. She was immediately rushed for a CT scan, which showed a hyperdense lesion, which was involving the basifrontal part of the brain, which is evident in these three cuts predominantly. Still, the part of the eye is normal. So this is the basic crux of what imaging showed and what was evident on the clinical examination. The patient, in view of the findings, the patient was suspected having mucormycosis. ENT reference was done, a sample was taken that was sent, was KOH positive for mucor. So a day after he was diagnosed, he was started on liposomal amphotericin B. He was initially started, this was on 7th. He was initially started on 5 milligram per kilogram of body weight, but when he had, or when there was suggestion of an intracranial involvement, the dose was increased to 10 milligrams. On 11th, he was operated upon and a functional endoscopic sinus surgery was done, whereby the medial wall, the septum, it was cleared. This is the follow-up MR scan, which shows the part that has been removed. I suppose people would be appreciating the cursor. So this shows that the contents, the ethmoidal part of the maxillary sinus, the septal part has been removed. There is suggestion of perilesional edema and a hyper intensity in the basifrontal part of the brain. In the next scan, that is visualizable, that this is essentially part of the hemorrhagic transformation of the basifrontal part, which is very common with fungal infections. So the patient was continued on liposomal amphotericin B, that was started on 7th and was continued for a total duration of 21 days till 28th of May. As an overlap, so this is another point which is important point in terms of the management of patients. The patient was started on isavuconazole, 2 tablets of 100 milligrams, which was started on 17 before we started tapering the patient from amphotericin. So it is usually advisable that if availability is not an issue and if the patient can be given an overlap, this improves the outcome of the patient. In addition to this thing, the patient has had till now 4 sessions of hyperbaric oxygen therapy at 2.5 atmospheres for 90 minutes till now. And in terms of the overall outcome, the pain has reduced, the healing, superficial healing has improved, and he is now been posted for another follow-up MR. So that will be done at 4 weeks in the follow-up. So ophthalmology consultation only confirmed the grade 1 hypertensive retinopathy. There were no suggestions of intraocular involvement, which was consistent with the diabetic and the hypertensive state. When the patient was having initial problem, the patient had also been subjected to a CSF. The initial CSF at that point of time was hemorrhagic. So a repeat CSF was done on the 25th, and that was suggestive of mild increase in the proteins. but the cultures were negative both for any bacterial or fungal growths. In terms of the laboratory parameters, this is something which I wish to highlight again. At the time of admission, he was diagnosed having renal dysfunction at admission. So as a take-home message, it's important that even when the creatinine is high, the first thing which needs to be done is to look for the renal ecotexture and how the GFR of the patient is behaving. This patient was having a GFR of 39 at the time of admission, and at the time when the amphotericin was discontinued, it was 2.45, which corresponds to a GFR of 40 ml per minute. So the important take-home message is that if a person is having a GFR which borders around 60, then the patient can be given amphotericin, a conventional type or a deoxycholate preparation. But when the GFR is less than 60 ml, it is advisable not to use this preparation. In this case, both lipid complex as well as the use of liposomal amphotericin B can be done till 30. And if the patient is not having any other suggestion on the ultrasound, it can be shifted or continued till the time the patient is having a GFR of 25. So this is something which is was important in this case. So if I try to summarize, the most important thing here is that there would be patients who are having periorbital swelling while he or she may not show any evidence of intraorbital pathology. So this can commonly occur when there are local inflammatory changes. They may be because of positioning or renal involvement when dependent edema takes precedence. The second thing is the staging may be complex in some cases. We are aware of most staging procedures where there is renal involvement and cerebral involvement. But it is well known that renal and rhinocerebral involvement, and as also been shown in the experience from SGPGI also, that there would be quite a lot of patients where renal involvement directly leads to a cerebral involvement. So staging may be extremely complex in these cases. Last but not the least, a high index of suspicion is required for the diagnosis. We saw that just over a period of 2.5 days, when there was no evidence of cerebral involvement, the patient had cerebral involvement, extension of the granulomatous material into the brain parenchyma. So we should have a high index of suspicion. Initial imaging had not suggested, and there was rapid extension. Last thing which I would like to suggest, that intracranial pathology needs to be managed aggressively. And as in this case, now he has been with us for almost 4 weeks. The outcome, we hope that the outcome would be favorable in our case. Thank you. So as I was suggesting, the headache had improved and the sugar was under control.
Hardeep, I think it is a very, very interesting patient, and there are the multiple points for learning actually, man. And the first thing is that I need to be emphasized that the patient was being managed in the home isolation. I'm right?
Yes, sir.
And
yes,
he
sir.
was being given, he was being given 4 tablets of dexamethasone. So each tablet of how much? 6 milligram or 4 milligram?
So the dose is not clear because they are the tablets are available in various denominations, but we expect that he was given 8 milligrams or more. So as per the WHO recommendation, it is usually said that more than 6 milligrams of dexamethasone per day for around 7 to 10 days is the usual dose, beyond which we should usually not go.
So why he was taking this dexamethasone? Because of the hypoxemia?
No, sir.
What was the indication for the...
You brought a very... Yeah, that the indication was not there. The only thing that they had done was the patient had been subjected to a CT scan. CT scan was suggestive of a CORAD score of 12. They said this is a moderate severity and you should start yourself on corticosteroids. And this corticosteroid was not started under a viral cover. This was started as such, and this might be a very important reason which has been shown by WHO as well as the CDC guidelines, that if we are not starting the patient under a viral cover, the chances of prolonged viral shedding is there. So besides the fact that the patient had something which went against him, he was also a case which might have led to more spreading of the virus in the community.
Yeah, I think this is a very, very important point. Do you think the patient was never having the SpO2 or the oxygen concentration level below 94%?
No, sir. So we do not have any evidence. The patient is still, he is conscious, he is oriented, and is still on room air, sir. So he still is not requiring supplemental oxygen.
Just want to have one comment from you, whether the steroid was indicated in this patient or not.
No, sir.
So I think unnecessarily the steroid uses in this patient, and he was also diabetic. I don't remember. Yes,
Yes, he was a diabetic for 10 years, sir, and had been having a good control of diabetes initially.
So I think the message should go that this is not a patient for the steroid use. Unnecessarily starting the steroid use for a long time, unnecessarily prolongation of the viremia, and maybe spreading the infections elsewhere also, and develop the complication of the mucormycosis. Another thing that I want to know from you, in such patients, once you see a periorbital puffiness or the swelling, so you did the endoscopy in this patient, no? I think
yes,
you or somebody else.
That was done by our ENT team, sir.
And that showed the mucor. Okay.
That was the sample was sent, and that was suggestive of the final diagnosis was rhizopus was found in this case.
I think there is another point that I want you to make a comment, that you hike the dose of the 10 milligram per kg body weight once you come to know that there is a brain involvement. So it is necessary, or it is mandatory, or it is a 7 to 8 milligram per kg is good enough?
So there have been some recommendations from the Mycology International, the consortium which is there. So if we look at the guidelines that have been published in Lancet, so that consortium says that if there is an intracranial or a cerebral pathology, it is advisable that the patient be started with 10 milligram per kilogram body weight of liposomal amphotericin B.
Okay, so I want to make this point also. If you have to use to such doses, I think you have to document that there is a cerebral involvement. That is one thing. Why did you do the CSF in this? I am just asking because to make the things clear to the audience, how to go about such patients.
Was it a hypertensive? Was it a hypertensive bleed, sir, or it is a? You think that a fungal involvement of the brain leading to hemorrhage? Because the patient was hypertensive.
No, that was actually this. No. This actually, the lesion that we saw was an extra axial lesion which was moving into the brain. It was not a pure parenchymal. Had this been a parenchymal lesion, we would have certainly thought that it was associated with some kind of coagulopathy or because of the hypertension. So that was not there. Since this was extra axial in nature, and we thought that is it so that meningeal involvement might be there in this patient? So the patient was subjected to a CSF. So the first CSF that was done, that was around 11th or 12th of May. So that CSF was hemorrhagic and a conclusion could not be drawn. So we repeated the CSF just to be sure of the fact that the patient is not harboring either a fungi or any bacterial infection in the brain. So that was the only reason, because the basifrontal involvement was extraaxial in nature, not an intraaxial lesion, sir.
Okay, Dr. Hardeep, there is a question from the audience that when should we do? When should we do second imaging after the surgical intervention?
Sir,
You have not done
sir,
any. And another is, I think, another question is it safe to use hyperbaric oxygen therapy in post-COVID pneumonia patients? You
yeah,
want to?
hyperbaric Hello. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, there is no contraindication. This is meant for the purpose of healing in these patients, and hyperbaric oxygen therapy is actually a part of recommendation of the mucormycosis group. So this is how we actually started on this thing, and as of now, as per our recommendations from the oral maxillofacial group people and the having a palatal surgery or extensive removal of the paranasal sinuses, the septum, in those patients to promote healing, hyperbaric oxygen has been recommended.
So there are few more questions also they want to be the answer. One is I think not exactly related to this patient. When should we do second imaging after the surgical intervention? Not related to this patient.
So after surgical intervention, on an average, if we look at the algorithm that was given, so in all, in the follow-up, it is usually advised that the follow-up imaging is required at approximately 14 days. So this has been said. So if we look at the post-operative imaging, these imagings only if there is a high index of suspicion that complete evacuation or exenteration or the debris that have been there have not been removed and the patient is showing deterioration, that we can go ahead with a repeat imaging. Otherwise, before 14 days, the repeat imaging is not required, sir.
Suppose the patient is deteriorating, then we can do it early also. If the patient is deteriorating.
Yes, sir. Sir, if we look at the deterioration, as in our case initially also, we had performed the second imaging right after on the third day. And if the patient is a post-operative case and we suspect that the patient is having any other deterioration, there are chances of bleed, then we can perform an early surgery, which may be done, early imaging, which may be done right between 1 to 2 weeks. There is no contraindication in this regard.
Two more questions, Dr. Hardeep, not exactly related to this case, but the interesting one. Is there any requirement of anticoagulation, antiplatelets in rhinocerebral mucormycosis with cavernous sinus thrombosis or multiple cerebral infarcts?
Sir, there is no recommendation. If we go by the pathophysiology, we know that the involvement of the vessels in this case, especially with respect to the intracranial extension, is twofold. Number one is the involvement of the vasa vasorum, that is the involvement of the vascular supply of the vessels. The second is an actual blockade of the vessels. Now, since this is usually seen upstream as well as downstream, antiplatelet use has not been documented. As far as the anticoagulants are concerned, it is said that at a reduced dose, that if we are starting with a low molecular weight heparin, then we can use as 1 international unit per kilogram body weight per day after 24 to 48 hours of surgery. Number one. The second thing is we can use apixaban in a lower dose, that is the recommended dose is 2.5 milligrams. Now this, what I am stating is a expert opinion and is not a guideline. So we are not very sure of whether this should be done, but this is certainly not a recommendation. So since most of our patients are already, because of a high D dimer or hyperferritinemia, since they are on low molecular weight heparins, so we have been continuing them, reducing in the perioperative period to 1 international unit per kilogram body weight, and then 3 to 4 days after back to the therapeutic dose.
Want to say something?
Even I would like to add, I mean, make a comment or make a point over here that when you have thrombosis due to infectious etiology at contiguous or non-contiguous sites, if you have the same scenario is also seen sometimes in tuberculosis also. If you have thrombosis on contiguous site, most likely it is because of local vasculopathy.
Extension.
Local vasculopathy, but it may
Yeah.
be at non-contiguous sites also. And in the background of COVID being a hypercoagulable state, after achieving adequate hemostasis, which is the red green signal will be given by the surgeon, and the post-operative imaging, I think after 24 to 48 hours, it is very prudent to start anticoagulation, the prophylactic anticoagulation in this case. And if thrombosis has been documented, therapeutic anticoagulation with low molecular weight heparin should be started. And in fact, in some case series or
Exactly agreed upon. Yeah.
pulmonary mucormycosis, there are case series in which there were multiple thrombi in the segmental as well as subsegmental arteries, pulmonary arteries. However, the disease was a localized disease which was resected. And after that, the patient had to be kept on anticoagulation for the management of thrombosis. So contiguous site thrombosis, mostly because of vasculopathy or local vasculitis. But at a non-contiguous site, it is because of hypercoagulability per se due to the disease the patient is suffering from.
But if you take the example of the mucormycosis invading into the cavernous sinus thrombosis, so the first thing is that it is because of the invasion of the fungus. So then what is the role of the anticoagulation here? I can understand that if it is a the hypercoagulable state and somewhere else is happening, so you can use the anticoagulation. I'm not aware of, I don't know the answer, just asking the question from my side to Dr. Hardeep or maybe some other person. So what is the exact role? When would you use the anticoagulation? Because once you're thinking that it is an invasion or it could be hypercoagulable state, so what are the indication of the anticoagulation? Exact.
Sir, actually, in our experience, what we do that when we plan surgeries, then we stop the patient of anticoagulant. And then we stopped it and we developed infarct. The patient developed infarct on the second day of the surgery, sir. So then we thought about it that if it is there and it was on a distant site, sir. The middle cerebral artery infarct was there. It was on little distant site. So we thought that we should start. So we discussed among ourselves, and then the neurologist has two opinions that either antiplatelet or the anticoagulant should be given. So we went ahead with, so the last two patients, we did anticoagulant, and Sir said, Hardeep said, in low doses because of the hypercoagulated COVID disease which the patient has just recovered. So I think it's I mean, when we stopped it, we had an infarct. So we are little cynical, skeptical to just continue to use, provided that in surgery itself, the hemostasis has been achieved as.
Okay. Dr. Hardeep, what is your thoughts?
Yes, sir. So actually, as far as the guidelines are concerned, there are no guidelines. But since we have been dealing with cavernous sinus thrombosis in the past, and we have been using preferably anticoagulants versus antiplatelet agents, so the evidence has been more in favor of the anticoagulants rather than the antiplatelets in such cases. So since post-COVID or in a COVID state, we know there is hypercoagulability. So it logically makes a point that maybe we can go ahead with this. So currently we are using.
So I would like to say,
yeah.
I would like to summarize. If you have an evidence or if you think that there is hypercoagulability is involved, so it is the anticoagulation which is desirable. It is not the antiplatelets. And as you have said, low molecular weight heparin is the drug of choice in that situation. And those you have told one
1 mg per.
One
per-
international unit per kilogram body weight.
Yes, per kilogram body weight. Yeah. I think this is a good question, and although there is no guideline, but it is a problematic situation that you might often get in case of a real life scenario. Is there any prophylaxis treatment for patients or sterile living in the remote villages? I don't think so. There is any prophylactic treatment also. Okay. I think we should not do anything. And Dr. Bhanupriya Singh, is perineural spread possible? Dr. Hardeep,
Yes, sir.
is it possible?
Sir,
Perineural spread
perineural
of the
spread-
fungus?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, yesterday also when we had a mortality discussion yesterday, and we had a patient who actually had a perineural involvement in this case. So we had evidence of involvement both at the level of trigeminal as well as at the level of the optic nerve. So there is a possibility that it may actually move along. We do not have a very good data on this thing, but since the tracking is there of the virus along the seams, so it is quite probable that it may be seen along the nerves also. This is not the mode of pathogenesis. This is what I want to highlight. The mode is through the vessels or contiguous. But perineural spread, if he says that, is it possible? Yes, it is possible.
It is possible, but we say that the fungus
Yes,
is angio-invasive, and the spread is through the invasion of a vessel also.
Yes, sir.
Maybe the local or contiguous spread in the peripheral perineural, I think it is possible. Is there a
Yes, sir.
role of the itraconazole in treating the mucor for follow-up in this patient? And if yes, then till how long antifungals can be continued? I remember actually the last time Himanshu has given the answer to this question. Itraconazole is only effective in one of the species of the mucor. So it is not cannot be used as a general antifungal agent. Am I right or wrong, Dr. Hardeep?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I think it can.
Sir, yes, sir, it can be used. The more important thing is that unless we have the cultures which are there, then it becomes a bit difficult whether that would be effective against this thing or not.
So it cannot be used as a general practice. If it is positive in culture and it has been shown on sensitivity that it is effective, then you can use it. Can you use it? I don't think so. Itraconazole can be used.
You cannot use it. I mean, generalized use cannot be done. However,
Nothing is
if you have identified or isolated the species which is sensitive to that particular antifungal, it is okay. Otherwise, in resource limited settings where nothing is available, then that can be given.
So what has been listed is that the most sensitive species, so out of the species that we have been seeing, and which is also the experience, I think, from SGPGI, that the three most important species that we are seeing is Rhizopus, the Leishthymia, and the mucor. These three species, they do not show a good amount of sensitivity towards itraconazole. Itraconazole is most sensitive towards the Epsidia, which is documented. Besides this, the documentations are not there, sir.
Okay, thank you.
One
There are
point-
many more questions. I think we can take them later on. So we can move on to the second case now. Second case would be presented by Dr. Alok Nath, who is professor and head of the department of pulmonary medicine at Sanjay Gandhi PGI. And the case is very, very interesting and is a case of the pulmonary mucormycosis. Dr. Alok?
Thank you, sir, and very good afternoon to all of you. I'll be just going to present one case which we have encountered, few cases of pulmonary mucormycosis, amongst which this was one in which we have been able to intervene because of the extensive disease. So this gentleman is a 58-year-old male who has got history of type 2 diabetes mellitus for last 15 years. He has a history of alcohol ingestion also. He was tested positive on 16th of April 2021 with the presenting complaints of fever and cough of 3 days duration. Initially, he was kept in home isolation, but he started having shortness of breath and fall in saturation from 28th of April. So he was admitted in Kanpur. During hospitalization, he was managed on with the IV antibiotics, intravenous glucocorticoids. Initially, methylprednisolone 60 milligram BD, and then it was tapered gradually. He received oxygen support with non-rebreathing mask. He was also administered anticoagulants and supportive care. Patient gradually improved. He became stable on room air, and he was discharged on oral corticosteroids, methylprednisolone 16 milligram BD, which was tapered for 2 weeks. The patient was doing well after 1 week around, but around 18th of May, he started complaining of fever with chills, recurrence of cough, and there was 3 episodes of hemoptysis, which were moderate in amount, having fresh blood. So he was immediately taken and admitted in Sefai, RIMS Sefai, Dawa, where he was evaluated, and a CT thorax was done, and a bronchoscopy was also performed. The CT showed a right large consolidation on the right side, cavitating consolidation on the right side, involving whole of the lower lobe. And you can see that there was all, necrotic area. Along with there was a hyperdense area also. And basically there was extensive necrotizing pneumonia involving the right lower lobe with intracavitary soft tissue density. A very good contrast study was not done. So this was looking like a soft tissue element in the cavity, along with the rind of fibrosis and debris. His bronchoalveolar lavage fluid was negative of fungal elements in Sefai. However, in the clinical suspicion of mucormycosis, a teleconsultation was also done with the SGPGI, and we advised liposomal amphotericin B and asked him to immediately take up this patient for surgical intervention. However, the patient was referred to SGPGI on 28th of May. So in SGPGI, he was admitted and further evaluated. All the laboratory parameters were normal. COVID RT-PCR was negative. CT thoracic angio with the high resolution CT scan of the thorax was done, which showed the same findings, that with some increase over the only in the interval of 3 days, there was an increase in the amount of debris and the thickening around the of the wall of the cavity, with intracavitary soft tissue density and parenchymal destruction. This is a larger view of the same. We can also see that there is areas of ground glass opacities on the left side also in the lingula. And you can also see that there is a cavitating lesion present in the left lower lobe also, which was not present 2 days earlier. So this shows that how rapidly the disease is growing. Within 48 hours, there was disease progression. And the angiogram showed a large bilobed saccular aneurysm of the pulmonary arising from the pulmonary artery, along with peripheral thrombosis. There was loculated fluid and minimal pleural effusion on both the sides also. The left side showed same cavitatory lesion in the lower lobe. This patient was immediately taken up, started on liposomal amphotericin B on day 1 with 7 milligram per kg body weight was started, and urgent CVTS consultation was taken. And initially looking at this CT scan, it was looking like that it is going on involving the upper lobe also. As you can see, there is a cavity with the air fluid level in the going up towards the upper lobe also. So a pneumonectomy was planned, However, while once on the table itself, the surgeons realized that actually the upper lobe was still preserved, and middle lobe also. So a right lower lobectomy was performed. These are the gross specimens from the Department of Pathology. We have got this images from Department of Pathology. This was about 15 centimeters size of this, and these are the stains of the lung tissue which we have obtained from Department of Microbiology. Thanks to Dr. Rungmi who provide these nice images. This is the West KOH mount, so showing broad aseptate fungal hyphae. I think you can appreciate the cursor. And this is the calcofluor stain, in which you can very nicely appreciate these broad right angle branching aseptate hyphae of the mucor. And this is the Gomori methanamine silver staining, that is GMS stain, depicting the same. So after surgery, the patient improved well. The patient's saturation was maintained. However, in the lung specimen, there was a heavy growth of gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria also. The patient has got secondary bacterial infection also. So the patient was started on broad-spectrum antibiotics. Today is the post-operative date 2. Patient is currently in post-operative ICU, and we are planning to wean him off and extubate him in next 24 to 48 hours. So I'll just briefly touch upon the pulmonary mucormycosis, that it is the third most common presentation of mucormycosis, and it's known for its aggressive course, as you can see in this index case also. Recently, there had been increasing awareness among the clinicians, also the advances in diagnostics, and increase in the susceptible population, because there is therefore there are increasing number of cases are being seen in the recent years. In a systemic review of about 851 cases, the reported mortality was about 46%. However, in this case series, only 20% of the cases included were of pulmonary mucormycosis. Therefore, most of the data on mortality actually has been extrapolated from rhino-orbital mucormycosis, because the major chunk of mucormycosis cases are ROCM. In the studies published before the year 2000, the reported mortality is more than 90%. And in subsequent reviews, it has been seen that gradually people have reported lesser mortality as compared to the previous ones. And some series also have shown excellent results in pulmonary mucormycosis, especially in up to 90% survival at 6 weeks with combination of medical and surgical therapy. Moreover, the advent of newer mold active triazoles, which we are aware of, those isavuconazole and posaconazole, and better surgical techniques could have contributed to better outcomes. So, but there are criticism and contrary views also, and people have reported more than 70% mortality in pulmonary mucormycosis in a few of the series, in which they have failed to demonstrate a combination of, benefit of combination of medical and surgical therapy. In a very recent, that is in 2021 January, there is a recent systemic review and meta-analysis, which have included very good studies with large number of patients. Most of the studies, they have excluded very small series also, and they have included 79 studies with 1544. This is from Dr. Arunalok Chakravarti, and in which they have they have demonstrated that combined medical and surgical therapy led to significantly better survival than medical therapy alone. That is 69% versus 31%, which was highly statistically significant. And only 468 of the 1544 patients were available for this analysis. So this was a small limitation of this study. And low rates of surgery in pulmonary mucormycosis are too many, because these patients are usually moribund. Many of them are immunosuppressed, and many of them general condition is too poor to intervene, and that could have led to publication bias, and also difficulty of surgery. That is because of distorted hilar anatomy, pericardial invasion, chest wall invasion, etc. And besides this, despite local disease, some patients are, as I told, that they may be inoperable because of several reasons, because of underlying hematological disease or poor general condition. So this is a graph in which they have shown that how decade-wise, how the mortality of pulmonary mucormycosis has gradually improved over the period of time. So early diagnosis, timely initiation of medical therapy, and the availability of newer antifungals have led to a better survival in the last decade. This is a small attempt from my side to just to have an algorithm how to go about when you get a case of pulmonary mucormycosis. After an initial evaluation, which goes without saying, with all the blood parameters and everything, and the crux of the matter is that a CT angio with an good quality HRCT thorax should be obtained. And if you have a non-cavitating disease with a cavity or a cavity less than 3 centimeters of size, there should be no pericardial or chest wall invasion and no vascular aneurysm or invasion. Then patients can be started on medical management with high dose liposomal amphotericin B. If the and patient should be reviewed periodically with chest X-rays. Chest X-ray periodically should be done. If you have a positive response, then after disease stabilization, you can step down with the newer azoles. However, in case of poor response or disease progression, patient should be subjected to surgical intervention also, and extensive resection with the clipping or resection of the aneurysm should be done. Similarly, if you have a cavitating disease with a cavity or a large area of involvement of the lung, which has parenchymal destruction with a cavity more than 3 centimeters size, and presence of mycotic aneurysm or pericardial or chest wall invasion, if the patient is operable, patient should be subjected to medical plus surgical treatment. However, if the patient is inoperable, to buy some time, medical management should be started, and coil embolization of the aneurysm or gel form embolization may be attempted to stabilize and actually take care of the immediate threat, that is massive hemoptysis, which usually takes this patient away from us, which we have encountered in past several times in our experience. And after stabilization and build-up of the patient, interval surgery may be done if required. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alok. I think you have given very clear-cut messages. And this is the first case of the pulmonary mucormycosis that we have discussed. And I would say that you can match both with the medical, but many times that the surgery is inevitable, that you have to do it. And this is the classical case where this cavity is more than 3 centimeters, and there is the mycotic aneurysm also. The other indication that you have told us about the surgical intervention include the pericardial involvement or maybe the chest wall involvement, where the therapy with the medical therapy is not that rewarding. So early intervention in the form of lobectomy, pneumonectomy, or other resection of the involved tissue is mandatory. I think this is very, very important. Even if you do not have the facility for the surgical intervention, I think Dr. Alok has very much clarified that even on the CT scan, if you are getting these findings, for example, again repeating, cavity more than 3 centimeters, mycotic aneurysm or involvement of the surrounding structure, that makes a clear-cut indication for the referral to a higher center where the surgery could be done. Now I just request General Puri for his comments about this case.
Yeah, so thank you, Professor Deepan. Very interesting case. It's not very common, so I'm going to ask, for my own knowledge, I'm going to ask Professor Alok a couple of things. Firstly, this was a case of post-COVID scenario with diabetes mellitus. Patient came and had a radiological finding of a cavitatory lesion in the lung on imaging. How was mucormycosis confirmed pre-operatively? That is my first question. How did you know that it is mucormycosis? It is a cavitatory lesion you saw in the lung in a post. How did you say it's mucormycosis? mycosis. That's number one. Number two, again, more for my own knowledge. What is the indication? A large lesion, as has been brought up very nicely, 3 centimeters, mycotic aneurysm, perhaps a possible cause for a rupture and perhaps hemoptysis would be an indication for surgery. That so my only thing is, have there been any long-term follow-ups, any analysis, meta-analysis of such cases, the role of only medical therapy versus medical and surgical therapy? How that is number two. Number three, what is the optimal time for surgery? Is it as early as possible, or you optimize the patient and then go in for surgery? So a couple of questions, if Professor Alok could take them out.
Thanks for a very nice set of questions, sir. The basis of diagnosis, number one, which I'll like to take, that's why we had looking at the first CT, the radiological appearance is quite typical of pulmonary mucormycosis. The presence of intracavitary soft tissue density, which got a sign has been described in radiology called the bird's nest sign. This is a very typical appearance of pulmonary mucormycosis, but can be seen with other fungus and as well as vasculitis also. Wegener also can mimic the same. However, the radiological appearance was very typical. But the microbiological confirmation always should be attempted. But when the patient came, we had sent his sputum for examination. But because the patient had hemoptysis and the angio showed a mycotic aneurysm of 6 centimeters size, the aneurysm was about 6 centimeters size. And after looking at the second CT, there was almost no doubt that this is nothing but mucormycosis. And after seeing this extensive destruction, now that encompasses your second question also. If you have an extensive disease with so much of parenchymal destruction and debris, waiting for surgery or deciding upon medical and surgical therapy, there is absolutely no time to wait in these patients, because you have seen the difference between a CT done at interval of just 48 hours. The disease has progressed, so much, and the other side, which was healthy in the first CT, has got involved. This can only be seen in a couple of situations, and in infective condition, mucormycosis tops the list. Otherwise, vasculitis can present like this, but because of the clinical setting, because of the diabetes, because of post-COVID state, and so much of muck around in the visible in the CT, immediate surgical debridement with resection of the aneurysm is of utmost priority and urgency. Otherwise, these patients might exsanguinate this is a ticking time bomb kind of thing. If you don't operate early, you might lose the patient immediately, and the patient can bleed to death, and nothing would be possible. The third question, timing of surgery. Yes, that is a very important question, because in case where there is no cavitating disease and patient's general condition is not too good, and there is no immediate life-threatening anticipated complication like massive hemoptysis, the patients can be started on antifungals, high-dose antifungals. Patient could be built up, and then surgery can be done. But if you are anticipating a catastrophic event because of the presence of a large aneurysm or a very large cavity with a lot of debris inside, which can erode the bronchial collaterals and can cause hemoptysis, it's better to operate early.
Thank you, Dr. Alok. And the third case presentation we have from the medical college, from the Bareilly also.
SRMS.
SRMS. But I am seeing a very peculiar phenomena from the participants. They are joining at 3 o'clock, and by 4 o'clock they start dispersing also. I think it seems that under pressure they are coming and joining. This is a teaching activity. Everybody must appreciate over here. We are taking out our time. We are taking our patience, and we are making the presentations for you only so that you can learn. Even from the last case, I would like to say that even if you are not able to do surgery in such patient, but if you are aware that at least you can refer to a center where these patients. So my request from all of you is that please show interest. If you are saying to begin with it was 300 and now this count has gone down to the 160 only, then we will not do such session, and we will inform to the government also. And we have the all records also who is just slipping out of these sessions. May I request now Dr.
Rohit Sharma.
Just
Yeah.
Dr. Rohit, please.
can you show the
Yeah,
photo of
Good afternoon, everybody.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Rohit Sharma, Professor and Head ENT from SRMS Institute of Medical Sciences. And this case was operated yesterday only, so we didn't have much time to collect all the videos and the. In quick time, we made some presentations, so I'd like to share this case with you. So, rhinoorbital cerebral mucormycosis, of course, everybody knows about it now. And this patient presented to us some days, 5-6 days back, with headache and swelling over the right eye. And the patient didn't have any documented reports of COVID, but had a history of fever 20 days. And she tested positive after the ENT presentation in the OPD. And so she tested positive on 28th May, but because so many days had passed, we again did a COVID test 2 days after, and she turned out to be negative only after 2-3 days. On 31st May, she was negative. So we admitted her immediately, and there was a history of oral steroid use at home, which was prescribed by some local practitioner. Doses were not known. And patient also had comorbidities in the form of uncontrolled diabetes, along with there was some acute ischemic infarcts in the posterior circulation, but patient was slightly sluggish, but she didn't have any focal neurological deficit as such. But she was active otherwise. She was conscious and oriented. A slight sluggishness or slowness of cerebral activity was there. Otherwise, patient was okay. But there was a loss of vision in the right, complete loss of vision in the right eye, and perception of light was absent, and pupillary reflex was also absent. There was conjunctival congestion and chemosis, and on anterior endoscopy and endoscopic nasal examination, there was only crusting present in the right nasal cavity, but there was no eschar formation. The typical eschar formation was not there. The patient was immediately started on liposomal amphotericin. I mean to say, because was situation in Lucknow or elsewhere, but here for the past 7, 8, 9 days, I have received amphotericin only for the past three times. It has been allotted every day on papers, but I didn't receive it at all. It was only 3 days we received. So yes, today also. Yesterday was once at the beginning and once in the middle of the week. So that was only 3 times we had received amphotericin. So this patient had been given only three doses of amphotericin. Interspersed every 2 or 3 days, there was a gap, but there was no option. So we also started on oral posaconazole, 300 milligrams OD. This is patient is getting regularly. She is buying it, and with these things only with us. And this is the radiological picture. And of course, you see that how extensive the lesion is. This is an MRI showing involvement of both the nasal cavities, ethmoidal areas, going on to the involvement of the orbits on both the sides, reaching into the orbit. And you can see how extensive the disease is. Going more posteriorly, you can see the extension. The medial aspect of the orbit is completely involved. And so both sides, this presentation was there, but blindness was there present in right eye only. Patient initially didn't give any consent for orbital accentration. So we planned surgery and explained everything that orbital accentration may be required, but at that time we didn't have the consent. So we started with endoscopic debridement, and we were able to perform bilateral endoscopic medial maxillectomy along with ethmoid and sphenoid clearance, along with septectomy, because septum was also totally necrosed by the time we took the patient up for surgery. This is a short. This is after the excessive clearance. This is on the orbit side. So this is on the right side towards the orbit. All things have been removed, already done. Surgery has been done. Most of the surgery has been done. So while I was decompressing the orbit, you can see how much pus started coming out from the orbit. So you see the amount of pus coming out, just giving a nick over the orbital periosteum. A lot of pus started coming. So, and a lot of muck also was there. And so the orbit, everything around the optic nerve and the intraorbital structures was all necrosed. There was no orientation of anatomy was all totally absent. So we again went to the patient attendants and discussed the problem with the patient, that the source of infection, that a lot of infection would be left around in the orbit if we didn't clear the eye. So after a lot of convincing, we were able to get the consent for orbital accentration. And so initially we had closed down, we had done the dressing and all because we didn't have the consent. Then we went outside and talked to the attendants again. And somehow, so you can see that dressings are already done. We had completed the surgery without orbital accentration, but then we rediscussed the attendants with for the orbital accentration, and then they agreed ultimately, finally. And so we went to do an orbital accentration where you can see the incision was given at the margins of the lids, and so I wanted to preserve the eyelids at this point of time because they were not that infected. They didn't appear to be infected, so that the eye later on the cosmetic result could be given. So this is the excision of the lid margin and lifting of the eye from the periosteum, ultimately orbital periosteum. Lifting of the orbital contents from the orbital periosteum. This is on the lower aspect. So lifting of the periosteum from the bone, orbital bone. So this is short. We have much more video, but I will not go much into the videos. So ultimately, the eye was completely excentrated, and along with the orbital contents, you can see how much necrotic tissue was there around the medial aspect of the eye. This eye could not have been saved, or it could not have served any cosmetic function also. So this is ultimately after the exentration. So complete exentration, we were able to achieve everything out. And you can see it's not very clear, but the medial wall of the orbit had already been removed from the endoscopic side. So the orbit and the nasal cavity and everything had been finally become one single cavity. This is for after the removal, the dressing medicated pack was put in the orbit also. And finally, the patient, of course, she's in the ICU because she had bad lungs, and we had to keep her in ICU for at least overnight. So now she's on BiPAP. The endotracheal tube has been removed now, and she's on CPAP now, and she's doing okay. We hope that she'll be able to make it out. But again, I'll request the people at the helms of the affair kindly provide us with amphotericin regularly, because doing all such surgery, I think, will not be only sufficient thing. We need to have a backup with the medicines also. Thank you. Any questions? I'd like to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rohit. Very well managed case also, and involving nasal also, rhino, and the orbital part also. The only thing what I have seen that amphotericin B was being given intermittently, but you have started the posaconazole on a regular basis. I
Yes.
think just a comment on this aspect as far as the medical treatment is concerned. All the treatment of the choice is liposomal amphotericin B. But if you do not get this product, then there are many more things actually. Recent studies have demonstrated that the second drug of the choice is isobuconazole. And if it is not available, then you can opt for the posaconazole, and that is something rightly that you have done. And I must congratulate for managing this patient so efficiently. And it is an example for the people who are attending this session also, that they can manage these patients in I would say in other districts also, as you have done in the Bareilly is a
SRMS.
SRMS. This is a very good medical college. I am aware of it also. So basically, the message goes that others should also tackle this patient, should treat this patient, and whenever there is an emergency surgery is required. You have done endoscopic also, and subsequently everything over here. That means that everything can be done elsewhere also. So I would like to have a comment from again General Puri also.
No, I think exceptional case, very nicely managed. Professor Rohit, I just one or two comments.
Yes, sir.
Firstly, was it along with the ophthalmologist, or was it all ENT surgery?
So all ENT, sir.
Okay, all right. I think so. That was question number one. Question number two was that when you are doing endoscopic clearance of the mucor, when you're trying to do this thing, when would you say that? Let's talk of the orbit now.
Sir.
When would you say that it is not possible to do endoscopic clearance or try and do a salvage of the eye and just try and do a little bit of a debridement, a surgical debridement of the periorbital tissue, versus when would you move on to an exentration? That is the indication. Yeah, that is it.
We have, sir, I think to throw a bit of light, we've already got around 28 patients we've got admission in our institute, and we have operated around 18 patients out of them. And around 5 or 6 patients had already lost their eyes. One patient had bilateral blindness. 5 or 6 patients had unilateral blindness. This was one of them. The problem with the orbital exentration is apart from disease clearance, the attendants are usually not willing to sacrifice the eye. So that is one of the biggest concerns, because it serves a bit of a cosmetic purpose rather than having an empty socket. So of course, we do explain the attendants that whenever there's an infection, if there's a limited involvement and eye function is preserved, then we always tend to go towards a sort of a orbital clearance only, limited orbital clearance. What we have done is we try to clear all the necrotic area and whatever is possible. And if we start seeing clear orbital tissues, orbital fat becomes non-necrotic, then we may stop doing it. If we find out that everything is involved and all the structures getting involved and eye is already dead, then there's no fun in keeping that dead eye inside along with the infection. Correct. So whenever there's a dead eye, it becomes easier for us to decide that radical orbital exentration should be done. But once in some patients, one of the patients I had was one of my students' brother from Gorakhpur. So Gorakhpur, nobody operated, so it was shifted to our institute, and we operated that fellow. And in that person, the look on the MRI was similar than this lady. This MRI is still better than the other person's MRI, and that one, but eye was totally preserved. The eye function was good enough, so we never thought of doing an accentration, because a functioning eye, nobody would like to lose. So there we did a orbital clearance, and some disease I think we had left out also, but the patient is arranging for amphotericin and all. So I think he's doing well with that also. So wherever we have a lot of severe disease or direct involvement of orbit with lot of muck inside or lot of necrotic tissue with the dead eye, that's easy for us, and we can always, we are confident of advising the patients to go for orbital accentration.
Thank you, Professor Rohit. I think a very well managed case. I think the limitation has only been of paucity of amphotericin. I think that perhaps is the only setback, because without the pharmacotherapy, surgical, this thing, I mean, is still continues to be fraught with danger. And I think that continues to be the single most important limiting factor. But very well managed, surgically, very well managed.
Right, so thank you, sir.
Thank you, General Puri. Dr. Amit would like to make a comment, please.
Sir, regarding this orbital management in these kind of cases, with our ophthalmology team, we have developed a protocol where if the medial orbital structure medial to the optic nerve is involved, we can do away with the debridement, endoscopic debridement. But if it is going lateral and entire orbit is involved and the vision is not there, then we go for orbital accentration. I have a case like this. If I can just show the MRI, that what I mean. I will just show with the MRI that what I mean is that if the entire orbital content like is involved, then there is, this patient has a model disease, entire orbital content is involved with the frozen globe and everything, then we do an external orbital accentration like we did with our team. If the only medial portion of it is involved, like if it is involved, the optic nerve is preserved, and if this medial portion is involved, we can go ahead and then do the endoscopic debridement. So in our series of 4 cases, we did 2 endoscopic debridement and 2 external debridement.
Then you save the globe?
Yes, then we save the globe, the interior part of the globe, because the interior part of the globe is usually not involved, because that does not come in contact with the most of the things. So we save the globe, although eventually the thesis bulbi will happen, but it is very good cosmesis along with the deep clearance. So this is the point I want to make, that if it is medial compartment, go ahead with endoscopic, but if it is a leopard compartment or the entire cone of the orbit is involved, then external approach is a good approach.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Amit. There are a couple of questions here. Dr. Rohit, very nicely managed case. This patient was diagnosed mucormycosis first and COVID later. Did she receive steroids or oxygen therapy? If not, what could have been the possible risk factors for mucor?
This is a, I think, controversy also. She didn't, of course, she received oral steroids, but she didn't receive oxygen. She was at home only, and so she presented with mucormycosis. Then we got tested for COVID, and she was positive for 2 days. Then immediately we got tested again because we were losing time. We had to operate as early as possible because a lot of days had passed. So we presumed that infectivity would also be lower at this point of time. So we did it again for documentation, and she was negative immediately within 2 days only. So she didn't receive. So we risk factors, I suppose the COVID itself is now, because number of patients in our series, they have not received steroids. They have not received, they have not tested positive for COVID. Only bit of history of maybe fever was there. Around 7 to 8 patients had been with those who are not documented for COVID. But presumably they had COVID because they were at home. They have had history of fever for 5-10 days. And that's it. They didn't take much treatment also. So I think one of the factors, apart from people saying that it could have been oxygen or it could have been steroids, I have started developing a feeling that COVID per se is predisposing to, because it's an immunocompromised state. It is altering the mucosa of the nasal cavity and the sinuses, so that it is allowing, maybe it is becoming less vascular, or maybe some thromboembolic phenomena is there. So because of less vascularity, or maybe because bit of necrosis, the fungus is sort of getting a good area to develop on. So that could be the reason that the fungus is developing even in the patients where there is no oxygen or steroid therapy.
Dr. Rohit, one more question related to this case is there any role of the local application of the amphotericin B after the exenteration?
Yes, sir, there is role. When I was a resident some maybe 20-25 years back, and when we used to manage mucormycosis, we always used to apply a lot of amphotericin locally, also irrigate, also douche also. But nowadays, scarcity of amphotericin such that we cannot use it for washing and douching. So we are limiting ourselves to IV treatment only.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for this nice case presentation and the discussion as well. Do we have any case from elsewhere? Any other medical colleges? Huh? Any other case to be discussed by any other person? I think from the next time, they can prepare cases. We want to discuss the cases prepared from outside, Lucknow, KGMU and the SGPGI, out of these two medical colleges or the institute. Maybe from Meerut, maybe from Kanpur, maybe from Banaras. So we would like to discuss the cases. And not only the well-managed patients also, but maybe also which are the problematic cases also. So what should be the next step on those patients? That is very, very good. I think once again, I would like to reiterate that the teamwork is very, very important. And you have seen all these patients. We were getting the diagnosis from the microbiologist, our Professor Rungmi Marak, within hours only. And so is in the KGMU, what I am seeing, surgeons, ophthalmologists, ENT surgeons, so many things I would say. I think that is something we have to follow in the days to come, because I don't think whether the number of the cases are increasing further or they are static now. Dr. General Puri, do you have any data whether it is increasing same or started decreasing this prevalence or incidence now?
Actually, ours being a referral center, what is happening is that most people are transferring patients into KGMU. Every day we are getting about 8 to 10 referrals of fresh cases. Every day, 8 to 10 fresh cases. Yesterday, you would recollect when we had talked, the numbers were around, I think, 244 or something. Today, in the morning, they've told me 254 is the number this morning. So every day is about 8 to 10 cases.
Yes.
5 cases we have also added. 5 cases we have also added since.
Amit is saying that he received 5 cases yesterday also at SGPGI. So because these two are the referral institutes, so let us see in the days to come.
I think it's a stabilized number.
He's saying that seems to be stabilized. It's okay, that is a good. I think we can stop now, and again in the next Wednesday, the time would be changed. I think we would start around 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock. Because next time onward, between 3 and 5, we are busy in other meetings also. So we will be discussing these cases from next time on every Wednesday between 12 o'clock and 2 p.m. That's okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. Kindly fill the feedback form. The link for the same is in the chat box.